Usually when members of different governments get together, it's done in public. But there's probably a lot more communication going on behind the scenes than we know. And there's one event that happens every year where some of the most powerful people in the world meet to talk business.
Security was tight today at the Grove Hotel in this leafy area north of London. 140 members of the global elite arrived here for a top-secret, hush-hush, off-the-record conference in the English countryside. How's this for a guest list? The head of the International Monetary Fund, former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, the heads of Amazon.com, Google, and BP Oil, former General and CIA Director David Petraeus, and what's a top-secret cabal of puppet masters without Henry Kissinger? All of them came here today for the Bilderberg Conference.
I'm not a financial advisor.
Welcome to the channel. I'm your host, the BitBoy. And today we're getting deep. If you want your political, financial, and historical IQs to increase, watch this entire video. After the Second World War, it wasn't entirely clear what the future was going to look like. It was a time to rebuild, and there were a lot of powerful people who wanted to pick up the pieces and shape the future in a way that benefited them. This is why so many big organizations like the United Nations, the Atlantic Council, and many others were formed in the decade after the war. The Bilderberg Group, well, it's another one of these organizations, and it's probably one of the most secretive. Although, over the past few years, they have been forced to become more public about their meetings. This is not an official think tank or incorporated organization like many of the others that we know, that have mailing addresses and public-facing representatives. This is an annual meeting where the most powerful people in the world gather to network without any journalists or outsiders. The first meeting happened in 1954 at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Netherlands. That's actually how the conference got its name. Over the years, it would happen at many different hotels, but the group would continue to call itself Bilderberg, probably because they didn't want a name that revealed any specific goals or alliances. The idea for the group apparently came from a guy named Józef Retinger, who was one of the weirdest characters that I've learned about during my research. Because he came from relatively humble beginnings and he died poor, but he had a massive impact on the world and was connected to some of the most powerful people of his time. But I guess they were fake friends? Retinger was a child prodigy who quickly worked his way up in politics to become a trusted advisor for Polish Prime Minister Władysław Zagórski. He also became famous during World War II for taking secret missions where he was dropped into Nazi territory by plane to meet with leaders of the resistance. When the war was over, Retinger became even more influential in politics with the founding of an organization called the European Movement, which laid the foundation for the European Union. He really doesn't sound like all that bad of a guy, and who knows, maybe he had good intentions. But the people that he decided to team up with makes me doubt that a little bit. The other founding members were the former Belgian Prime Minister and central banker Paul van Zeeland, CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith, and Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller. But they got involved a short time later. There was also Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was basically a double agent spy who was working for both the Nazis and the British at the same time. He was the chairman of the group until 1976, when he was forced to step down after it was revealed that he accepted a $1 million bribe from the weapons contractor Lockheed Martin to convince the Dutch government to buy fighter jets with taxpayer money. In an interview just before his death, he admitted to the scam, but claimed that all the money went to the World Wildlife Fund, which he also helped to build. Some of you all will get that joke later. And like many of the other organizations that were formed to direct global politics following the Second World War, the Bilderberg Group did not make any announcements to the public and didn't invite any press. This meeting was supposed to be very secretive, and apparently the attendees were instructed not to tell anybody about it. The meeting managed to fly under the radar for the first 15 years or so of its existence. Towards the late 60s, rumors began to spread about the group, but most people thought that it was harmless, or they were skeptical that it even existed. Then, in the 1970s, an obscure journalist named Jim Tucker began writing about the group for a conspiracy-focused newspaper called The Spotlight. He claimed to have sources in that group that would leak his details and lists of the names of people who attended. He must have had someone on the inside because the leaks he got were always inaccurate. Eventually, he started to learn ahead of time where the conferences were going to be, which was top secret information back in those days. They didn't have the internet. For many years, he was the only journalist covering the conference, and he was constantly harassed by goons that were hired by the conference. Into the 90s, other independent journalists like Alex Jones started to cover the conference, which started bringing some real attention. Once the idea started to spread, some of the politicians and members of the media that weren't invited, well, they started asking questions. A massive turning point for public awareness about Bilderberg came in 2012 when there was a massive protest outside of the group's meeting in Chantilly, Virginia. This was a few months after Occupy Wall Street, so the timing was perfect to organize a protest about a bunch of billionaires gathering to decide the fate of the world. Hundreds of people showed up, which was the biggest opposition that the group had ever seen. In the years leading before it was only a small handful of activists and independent journalists, but now the whole world was paying attention. This protest really made Bilderberg go viral, and they had to totally change how they did things after that. Now that they knew they would have hundreds of independent journalists and protesters outside of every meeting, realized they could be a lot more open with the media to make it appear they have nothing to hide. They always do. Now they actually put out press releases and vague lists of things that they discussed, which is still secretive. The press release from last year's event just had a list of obvious topics. There are so few details that I can read off the entire thing right now. State of AI, AI safety, changing faces of biology, climate, future of warfare, geopolitical landscape, Europe's economic challenges, U.S. economic challenges, U.S. political landscape, Ukraine and the world, Middle East, China, Russia. Well, yeah, of course they're going to be talking about AI and geopolitics, but that doesn't tell us anything about what they're saying at the conference or what their actual positions or plans are. The group also publishes the names of attendees, which actually does give us a little bit of insight into the politics of the group. However, some critics have argued that these lists are complete and that many names are left off. Browsing the list is still very interesting though. You will see names from some of the top companies, banks, and media organizations in the world, along with politicians and heads of government agencies from across the political spectrum. The Bilderberg Group is not exactly what it used to be. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure that important conversations that end up impacting our lives happen there. But it's not the only show in town anymore. There are now a ton of different conferences, like the World Economic Forum, that bring together powerful people from all over the world. But you see, the major difference there is that the media is actually invited to those events. But that's just for show. Everyone knows that the real business happens at the side events. If you've ever been to a crypto conference, you know that's how it goes. And I'm sure it's the same at some of these highly publicized events where all these ruling class figures are in the same town. Private events are probably many Bilderbergs happening all throughout the year. You also have to imagine that today, there are probably Telegram and Signal chats where a lot of dirt goes down too. Maybe they even have their own messaging service that they develop themselves so it can't be hacked. The point is that these people have plenty of ways to communicate privately that weren't available 50 years ago. Just something to think about. That's all I got. Be blessed. BitBoy out.